a Kangaroofern production.
And we're banking 96% of revenue upgrades this year, keeping pressure off inflation while it's still above the band. With Treasury now expecting we could get back to the inflation target this year, not next. That means inflation is expected to be lower sooner. And we've achieved all of this despite much smaller revenue upgrades in the budget and still providing an extra $3 billion to ensure Australians, including our veterans, receive better essential services.
Hello, everyone. This is Miko Santos, and welcome back to the FreeMan Podcast Chronicle. So, on today's episode, we're talking about the budget 2024, which is just recently announced by Treasurer Jim Chalmers for the budget of 2024. On today's episode, we're talking to Dr. Susan Stone. She is the Credit Union SA Chair of Economics at UniSA, undertaking research on issues pivotal to the state of South Australia. Prior to joining UniSA, Dr. Stone was a division head at the OECD, a director for UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and Pacific. Please welcome to the show, Dr. Susan Stone. Hi, good evening, Dr. Susan.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to be here.
Well, it's a long speech from the treasurer tonight. So the first thing is that they have they have a 9.3 billion surplus for the budget, but why are they talking about? They're also like a 28.3 billion deficit for 2024 to 2025. So can you explain to us, there's a surplus, but there's a deficit in between?
Yes, it is confusing. The surplus refers to the amount of money the government takes in this year, 23-24. So because tax revenue has been high, so many people are working, so they're paying income tax. And commodity prices have been very high this year. So the government's made money on that as well. So this year, 23-24, they've been able to bring in more money than they've spent. And that's why they have a surplus. Now, next year, they're not expecting those same variables to be as strong. So they are expecting there'll be a higher level of unemployment. Commodity prices may or may not be as strong, but spending is going to increase significantly. So next year, they anticipate having a deficit where they're spending more than they're bringing in.
Dr. Stone, how will be the budget impact Australia's economic growth and inflation in the coming year and beyond?
Well, for growth, I think this budget is really trying very hard to provide some relief without causing more inflation. So I don't think it's going to do a whole lot for growth. Growth will remain fairly subdued for Australia, I believe. I don't think there's a lot in this budget for the next year anyway that's going to create a lot of growth. The concern for the inflation would be things like the electricity bills. They're going to give every household $300 a quarter for that relief, utility bills. They're also going to give low income households relief for rent. But in my opinion, I don't think that's going to be very hard on inflation. The RBA, when it looks at inflation and makes its decisions, looks at things like core inflation rate, which doesn't include energy prices. And it also looks at a trimmed rate, which kind of takes off a lot of the volatility. So they're arguing that these rebates or these relief will lower inflation. I'm not sure how much it's actually going to lower inflation, but I don't think it's going to put a lot of pressure on inflation either.
So you're saying yes, cost of living. They said they have $300 electricity bill rebate, 10% increase in rent assistance, 1 year freeze on PBS co-payment, fi- and 5 years freeze on PBS co-payment for pensioner. So I'm writing something while the treasurer is talking about the budget. They saying she say that slow to 1.75% the economic growth in 2023 to 2024, but it's gonna be 2% on 2024 to 2025. Well, can you explain that?
Right. That means the degree to which the economy is going to expand. So how much more goods and services we're going to produce in Australia over the year. So this next year, it is supposed to be rather slow, 1.75. Most of the major economies are expecting to have fairly slow rates of growth, as most of our trade partners in other OECD countries are struggling to come out of inflation. The year after that, it's supposed to only be 2% because they're not anticipating to have any. Like I said, there's a lot of the spending that they're anticipating in this is going to come online in 2, 3, 4 years. So they're not anticipating that that's going to have a big push soon. It's going to be more further out.
So the treasurers also said that the gross debit right now is 35.2%, and it's gonna be that's on 2026 to 2027, and then it will be declining to 30.2% between 2034 to 2035. On Australia's current debit today, is the budget sustainable track in the long term?
Australia does not have, if we look at other developed economies, like if we look at the OECD, Australia's debt levels are a little less than average. Right now, if you look at average, or you look at, the problem is they are a little bit higher than the median, because if you look at some countries that have really high debt, that pulls up the average. But if we look at the median, Australian has a little bit higher debt than the median. So it is a little bit on the high side, but right now, Australia still has an triple A rating for credit agencies. So it won't have trouble borrowing at a good rate. So as long as there's a plan to bring the debt down, I don't see it as being a major issue for Australia.
Thank you so much for that. Most of the budget is about cost of living. Let's say there's a 6.2 billion for new housing investment, 32 billion homes for investment, future investment plan, and 1.9 billion loan to help building affordability. So is that what do you think about this? They push into a cost of living like this new houses plan to build.
The problem isn't a lack of money right now. Housing, there's a lack of supply. It's really has to do with, for a long time, it had to do with you couldn't get access to materials. Labor shortages continue to be a problem. The idea of putting loans out is a good one, because there has been some issues with being able to get financing. But by and large, unless builders can get access to more people to help them build the homes, they can put as much investment in there as they want, and it's not going to change anything. Really, we need more people to build homes. We need land. Like when they say slash red tape, I'm interested to hear what that is about, because there has to be land made available. There has to be some plans about how they're going to make more housing available, given other constraints in the system, including where you can build and how high you can build and things like that. So These are much more important right now, and that needs to be sorted. So I am looking forward to looking into a bit more detail about their slashing red tape, as they say.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, especially what you're thinking about, they're giving more focus as well, aside from the cost of living, they're also more focused on small business. So 4 million small businesses, they give 290 million in cash flow supports. And they also want to prioritize 500 million for priorities as well.
The skill priorities are a necessity. Australia right now is really suffering from a skills mismatch in the sense that there's a lot of people out there who are looking for work or want more hours. We've all seen the statistics on underemployment, but they don't necessarily have the skills or the right placement to find the jobs. So we really do need skills. We need more and trades. There's a big deficit in trades available. So the places for free TAFE to help construction is important. But we really do need to help businesses to overcome and to also train. One of the things that Australia doesn't do very well is because there are so many small businesses who are under pressure for costs. They don't do a lot of training of their employees. They don't really help employees gain skills. So to the extent that some of this money can help small businesses meet current costs as well as providing opportunities for their staff or new staff, I think that's really a good measure.
Thank you so much for that. So most of the winner here in the current budget are defense. There's like almost 50 million defense, aged care, electricity, and green manufacturing. Opposition said that this budget is not the actual solution. It's only a temporary. What do you said about that?
There's something to that in the sense that a lot of these measures are for the next year, for the next 2 years. You can look at it as that could be an election cycle, but it also could be um, testament to the fact that we don't know what the next year or two is going to hold. We're coming through a big transition right now. We're trying to get inflation down. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of geopolitical turmoil that's going on and Australia is a big exporter. So a lot of our markets are under increasing pressures overseas. So the next year or two will be a transitional period for the economy, not only Australia's economy, but other economies as well. So to the extent that the budget doesn't other than the big future made in Australia, they're putting a lot of money into renewables and trying to for Australia to become what did they say, a renewable superpower. Other than that, there isn't a lot of predetermined investment, which might not be a bad thing at this stage.
How does the 2024 budget compare to previous budget in terms of spending priorities and fiscal responsibility?
Well, I can say that I've only been in Australia the last couple of years, so I can only say for the recent past. I mean, the issue is that we had COVID, and COVID was such an anomaly, and spending and fiscal constraints and all of the normal budget restraints were out the window. And then after COVID, we were dealing with the aftermath of that, fiscally speaking. And that probably added to the inflationary pressures as people began to spend again, but supply chains mismatched. And then we came into the inflationary cycle. So I think the last 4 or 5 years, even, what we would consider quote unquote normal budgetary or fiscal plans really went out the window. And we're only now starting to return to those kinds of priorities. But then again, over that time, priorities have changed. And we see a bigger push for renewables. We see a bigger push into new technologies. We see a bigger push into gaining market share. And we also see a bigger push into broader policies that have a lot more government involvement. So we're kind of entering a new era, I think.
Thank you so much for that. How will equip this budget to handle unforeseen economic shocks or either national disasters?
That we have to see. I mean, we know that one of the issues with climate change is that we have increasing amounts of natural disasters. So there needs to be some flexibility. The fact that they're coming into this year had a surplus. The budget deficit next year projected is actually not as big as the one after that. So they're going to have a relatively smaller budget deficit next year. So there should be some room to be able to respond. But obviously those issues need to be accounted for, and we really do need to be prepared for that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stone. My last question to you, Dr. Stone, is that in your opinion, what are the most important economic issue not directly addressed by the budget, and how should they be tackled?
One of the biggest issues right now, which actually the budget doesn't address, if you want, it may contribute to, is this rise in industrial policy. It's a rise of governments becoming more involved in the economy and trying to steer the economy in certain directions. I mean, industrial policy has always been around. Governments have always tried to incentivize certain sectors, certain activities. That's always been the case. But now there are a lot of global geopolitical tensions that are sitting on top of that are causing businesses to rethink some of the traditional ways that they've gone about their business. So where they operate, what shipping lanes they use, where they're going to build into the future. And these things are starting to have an impact on corporate decision making. And to the extent that Australia needs to be able to show itself to be a good place to do business, it needs to show that it has the labor, that it has the infrastructure, that it has the business environment. These are all critical going forward to be able to compete in this new global landscape. And, to a few things, there's some of the TAFE places. The infrastructure projects are important, but also in a broader sense, the business environment is critical, which isn't really directly addressed in this.
Thank you so much, Dr. Susan Stone, the Credit Union SA Chair for Economics at Uni SA.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. This is another episode of the FreeMan Podcast Chronicle under the Evening Post AU. See you again for next week for another episode. Thank you so much.